In the heart of a small village located next to a dark and mysterious forest, people always passed by with caution. The forest always gave people a sense of danger because of the tall and dark trees. No one knew anything about its interior, but there were many rumors about the strange creatures that lived inside. The sound of night howls, moving shadows, and even the sound of footsteps heard at night made this forest a forbidden place. Once upon a time, a boy named Arash, who was always looking for excitement and discovering unknown things, decided to go deep into the forest. He had always heard about this forest and could not easily pass it by. Night after night, he had strange dreams about the forest, as if something was drawing him there. One dark and foggy night, Arash took a backpack of equipment and a flashlight and decided to enter the forest. He had told everyone that he was going to search for the truth, but in his heart he knew that something beyond the truth was waiting for him. After crossing the borders of the village and stepping on the edge of the forest, he quickly noticed that the weather had changed. The trees were pressed together in a strange way and thick fog was coming out of them. A heavy and strange feeling was scattered in the space. Arash went forward step by step. The dry wood was breaking under his feet, and a soft howling sound could be heard from around the hands. At first these sounds seemed normal to him, but the further he went, the more he felt that something was following him. The sound of footsteps as if rising from the ground could be heard. The sounds never stopped, the forest never seemed to rest. After hours of walking in the dark, Arash reached a clearing or an open place. Something strange and scary is visible in this place. In the middle of it was a huge tree with twisted gray branches. The trunk of the tree was so old and worn as if it had lived for thousands of years. Around the tree, there is evidence of various detritus, skulls, bones, and scraps of old clothing. Arash, who was now very scared, wanted to go back, but before he could move, a voice came from behind him. "You can't go. You came and now you have to stay." When he returned, what he saw was even scarier than he had imagined. A tall creature with an ugly face covered in black skin, hiding like a shadow among the trees, was approaching him. His bright red eyes were staring at him from a distance. Arash lost his hand and foot and ran forward, but the trees of the forest were arranged in such a way that no matter how he ran, he would never leave this place. A few hours passed and Arash reached the last point where he thought the forest would end. But here was something different. The trees were tied together in a strange way, as if they were trying to trap him. At this moment, Arash heard rustling sounds behind him, and when he turned around, he saw many creatures coming towards him through the trees. Arash, who saw no escape, his heart was pounding with fear. The bright red eyes of the creatures that approached him from among the trees, none of them resembled humans. They were semi-human beings with black and elongated skin, long and curved fingers that seemed to sink into the ground at any moment. The rustling of leaves and cracking of wood came under their feet, like thunder in the middle of a storm. These creatures moved in complete silence, their eyes still fixed on Arash, and no emotion of fear or distress could be seen on their faces. With every step that one of them took towards Arash, the surrounding air became heavier. Arash tried to control himself and think of a way to escape, but his mind was completely blocked at this moment. The trees around him were moving miraculously, the branches twisting together as if to encircle him in their midst. They were so tightly packed that there was no way to move forward or backward. At this moment, one of the taller beings took a step forward and stood at a very close distance. The sound of his deep breathing sounded like the booing of bees in Arash's ears. The creature said with a scratchy voice and a whisper that was lost in the night, "You can't leave here. Everything and everyone here is under our control. You will become a part of it." Arash looked at the creature with fear and asked, "What do you want from me?" The creature replied, "We need souls. The forest, here, is where lost souls are trapped. These trees are each of the souls that were trapped in this forest long ago. They were the ones who came like you and didn't make it come back." Meanwhile, Arash felt that his legs were heavy and he could not move. His hands began to shake strangely. It was as if an invisible force had trapped his body. His mind was quickly reviewing his past memories, all the warnings given by the villagers, all the stories he had heard, but none of them had been able to dissuade him from his decision. The surrounding trees began to boil and produce something like a black, sticky liquid. This liquid would flow to the ground and the trees would absorb it. At that moment, the ground seemed to start shaking as well. The sound of sharp and ear-splitting whistles could be heard in the distance, as if the forest had shaken itself. Arash quickly started shouting, "Help! Please help!" But his sounds faded into the forest and it seemed that no one heard. At that moment, a terrible sound came from the trees, just like the sound of endless cries. The sound of cries as if they were coming out of the earth. The creature that had spoken to him earlier stepped towards Arash and said with the eyes that now looked more like two fireballs, "Your time is up too. Soon as the other souls were trapped, you will become one of us." Arash, who now had no choice but to surrender, tried hard to keep his composure. He knew he had to do something to save his life. He remembered what one of the elders of the village had told him: "Nothing in this forest can harm you unless you believe in its power." Arash raised his hand to the ground and touched the cold soil. There was silence for a moment. He closed his eyes and started repeating certain words in his heart that he never knew where they came from. As he whispered those words, he felt something inside him shift. Suddenly, an unknown power flowed through his body, and he charged with all his strength towards the huge tree and the creature standing before him. At that moment, the ground shook under his feet and the trees snapped violently. A bright light shone out from the trees and all the creatures in the forest began to fade away, like leafless shadows. Arash, who was greatly affected by the world around him, suddenly found himself next to the same clearing that he had reached in the beginning. The forest seemed calm and quiet now, but he knew that this calm was only temporary. He came out of the forest and returned to the village, but there was always a fear in his heart. Afraid that what he saw might just be the beginning of something bigger. The forest was always waiting for someone else to enter, for lost souls to be trapped and an endless cycle to begin. Arash could never fully think about what happened in the forest. But sometimes at night, when he was walking in the heart of darkness, he heard the sound of strange footsteps that could be heard in the heart of the forest, somewhere far from the village border. After returning to the village, Arash was never able to forget what happened in the forest. His eyes were very tired and deep, as if something heavy was weighing on his heart. Every night when you sleep, you have strange dreams, dreams in which the forest was still present and black creatures with red eyes roamed it. He knew that something was still waiting in the heart of that forest. Once upon a time, one of Arash's old friends, named Salmon, asked him to go to the forest again. Salmon was never afraid of the forest, as Arash saw. He even joked that the forest was just a myth and that there was nothing real there. This time, she decided to go into the forest with Arash, hoping to overcome her fears and discover the truth. Arash, who had changed a lot since those days, initially refused, but finally, due to Salmon's insistence, he agreed to accompany her. This time, these two people were not only entering the world of terror and darkness of the forest, but also looking to discover secrets older than what Arash had realized in his first trip. That night, just like the first night when Arash had entered the forest, a thick fog was scattered around them, and the tall tree stood before them, as it was engraved in his mind. With every step they took, the sound of wild and strange howls could be heard from the heart of the forest, as if this forest would never rest. After walking for hours in the dark, the two reached a place that Arash remembered well. The same clearing where the huge tree was located, and evidence of blood and bones were scattered around it, but this time, something more than fear engulfed Arash. The surrounding trees had changed. The trunks of the trees were strangely twisted and as if they were moving. This forest was no longer the forest that Arash had seen on his first trip. At that moment, something moved in the heart of the huge tree. The branches of the tree shook violently and the sounds of breaking and splitting the trees were heard. Arash said to Salmon, "Be careful. There is something here other than what it seems." Salmon looked at him and said, "It's just your fear. The forest can't be anything more than that." But at that moment, a loud and annoying howl was heard from among the trees. The huge tree trembled, and its branches reached towards them like evil hands. At this moment, a tall black creature came out from behind the trees. This creature not only had a scary appearance, but the face that shone in the heart of darkness was like a nightmare that Arash and Salmon could never escape from. This creature was walking through the trees and looking at them with its brighter red eyes. Arash and Salmon quickly turned back and ran towards the edge of the forest while their hearts were pounding with fear. But every step they took, it was as if the forest closed more around them. Trees were inexplicably closing in on each other, blocking exits. At this moment, Arash remembered the stories that the villagers used to tell about the forest and its creatures. They had said that the forest never gives a way to escape. The forest is designed in such a way that no one can get out of it. Everything was trapped here. Arash understood this in his heart. "Salmon!" Arash shouted. "We have to run. This forest is devouring everything." But Salmon, who was shaking with fear, could only look at Arash. The wildly tangled trees were now moving rapidly. It was as if the forest itself was alive and running after them. At this moment, Arash remembered the power that he was able to use in his first trip at the last moment. The thing that allowed him to escape from the creatures. Arash closed his eyes and repeated the words he didn't know where they came from in his heart. This time, these words sent an enormous power flowing through his body. The trees shook violently and broke apart. Their branches parted like hands that parted. The black creatures that came towards them were suddenly destroyed by this unknown force. The forest began to change. The trees calmed down and the ever-present fog began to thin. But Arash and Salmon could never escape from what happened in the heart of the forest. In the middle of the night, sometimes they heard footsteps from the forest that they could never forget forever. Something was still waiting in the heart of the forest. Arash and Salmon both knew that the forest is not just a place. This is the place where dreams and nightmares meet and no one can escape. The forest was always waiting for the next person, one who enters into sin and can never escape from there.